Hello everyone and welcome to this introduction to Heroku. The goal of this series of videos is to make you master Heroku and understand it from all angles. Here we will talk about Heroku applications, its architecture, the cost of it, and other things. We will learn how to deploy and manage web applications, how to use add-ons, and we will save your time by sharing with you the different functionalities of Heroku, with everything related to code development. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction course. Before going into details, I will first introduce Heroku and tell you about its requirements. The goal of this lesson is that by the end of it, you will be able to create your own web application and use the Heroku functionality to save your time. We will also talk about the architecture of Heroku, as this information will help us get a better idea of what things work inside. We will finish with some concrete examples in real-life situations to better imagine what we are talking about. Let's start with requirements. There are actually very few requirements for this lesson, but it will be much easier to understand with a basic knowledge of Python and Node. There will be some programming terms in this course, for example. This can be challenging if you don't understand the code used. It will also be useful if you know how a Git works, as a lot of the work is done using Git. But first of all, what is Heroku? It's a platform as a service, also called PaaS, platform as a service. But what is it exactly? It's a cloud service provider that offers hardware and software tools as a service on the internet, allowing the user to develop apps. Hardware and software are hosted on the infrastructure, so users don't need to install their own hardware and internal software to run or create applications. This allows the developer to build, launch, or manage applications, all in the cloud without having to build or maintain the infrastructure that the software development process typically requires. For example, deploying such a tool internally may require a full team of programmers to purchase and install the hardware, operating systems, or middleware such as database or web servers. It's also essential to define user access, set up security, and add the application to the existing management system or application performance monitoring tools. With Heroku, you will be able to deploy web applications and use Heroku's time-saving functionalities. Applications are executed with dynos. Dynos are virtualized and isolated Linux-based containers that are effectively designed to execute code based on users' specified commands. However, developers can upgrade their application to any number of dynos depending on the resource demands of their application. Overall, dynos are essential building blocks intended to power any Heroku-based application from simple to sophisticated. Deploying the application on dynos and using Heroku's dynos management can make it easy for developers to develop and execute highly scalable and flexible applications. Then Heroku charges customers based on the number of dynos used and their size. But why Heroku? If we compare Heroku to AWS, Amazon Web Service, we realize that Heroku uses AWS to operate. The platform and applications of Heroku are deployed on its cloud. So why choose Heroku over AWS? You should choose Heroku if you don't want a DevOps team that will manage and configure the infrastructure. Heroku is often considered to be much more accessible to novices and startups because it's easier to learn and configure it. There are also many Heroku add-ons that allow you to add more functionalities to an application with a single click. Again, this saves a lot of time, but it's important to know that Heroku is a little bit more expensive than AWS. Amazon is also more interesting if you don't need a lot of data mining or machine learning algorithm, for example, because it's much more adapted for heavy computing. That's all for this presentation of Heroku, and see you soon for the next lesson. Hello everybody, and welcome to this introduction lesson of Heroku. In this video we are going to see the different languages that Heroku can use and also integration that it supports. First of all, we have Ruby. It was the first language that was compatible with Heroku when it was released in 2006. Nowadays, Heroku is also compatible with Python, Node, Java, PHP, Go, Scala, and Clojure. It's important to mention that Heroku is an essential service. Its growth is continuous over the years, and its infrastructure receives more than 25 million requests per day. It manages more than 8 million applications and has more than 150 add-ons. Now let's talk about the integrations of Heroku. Heroku supports more than 150 integrations. Let's take a look at the most used ones. First, we have Heroku Redis, which is a memory database. It's very useful when you want to save data that you want to find often and quickly. Then we have Postgres, which is a standard SQL database that allows you to store your data and your requests as a database. The next one is Heroku Kafka. Often used for its ability to handle failures and its fast communication between systems, it's a pillar to build applications able to manage billions of actions and transactions. The last one is Salesforce, the leader in customer relationship management, which allows you to keep all customer data, manage payments and leads for businesses. Salesforce is also the owner of Heroku. It's a homemade solution to connect the two platforms. The application we will use as an example will be a simple management system. It will be possible to create, read and update the tools of the application. The first step is to build a server in one of the languages that Heroku supports. This server will be able to receive requests and answer them. The code will also be responsible for all the logic related to the user. The first thing we need is a place to store all the users, a database like Postgres. Since the data is stored, it's not possible to create, read, update, or delete users. For this to happen, they would have to exist in the application but also be visible on Salesforce so that everyone involved can see them. With Heroku, this is easy because Postgres can connect to Salesforce. They will be combined. Let's say that to improve performance, we don't want to have to send a request to the Postgres database every time someone wants to read a user. For that, we can set up a hiding system that allows you to offer an alternative. For example, if you don't want to send a request, you can simply store the data in the hiding system, and using a shortcut, you can take back all the data. It's important to mention that Redis is designed only for jury duty. There is no risk of data manipulation. Heroku has multiple add-ons other than those previously mentioned that can also be integrated into your projects. Heroku Elements is a kind of marketplace with the add-ons we talk about and one of the most powerful tools of Heroku. That's all for this video, and see you soon for the next one. Hello everybody, and welcome to this introduction to Heroku. We will dedicate this video to the functionality of the platform and how it can help with application management. After an overview of the architecture, we'll talk about permissions and pricing. First, let's see how Heroku works with an application. As said before, we know that Heroku uses several languages such as Java, Python, etc. The application is the source code developed in one of these languages, but this is not enough, because most of the code we use today has pre-built dependencies. So, to make the application work well, it's necessary to teach Heroku the type of dependencies it needs to find. Finally, Heroku needs the source code and a description of the dependencies required to launch the application. The description of the dependencies varies depending on the programming language. For example, for Ruby, there is gem-file. For Python, is requirement text. For Node, it's package.json. And for Java, it's pod.xml. These files are the ones that will give Heroku a list of dependencies that it needs to search and install. Just with the source code and the dependency description, Heroku is smart enough to know how to run the code. It will first install dependencies and then run the application using them. Heroku has something called a build pack, and it's the build pack's responsibility to understand the code's dependencies and look for them so that the application can use them, as well as to create some data required to compile and run the code. It means things that are not from the code but that we need, like videos, for example. After that, the build pack finishes it with a slug. When it has finished its work, it's time to inject the configuration variables. They are often identification information or environment variables. They are then accessible with the current code. We can ask ourselves why this is not directly in the code and simply be able to access it from there. Why did Heroku go so far as to develop a solution to add variables to applications? The main reason is security. Having this type of variable directly in the code would mean that anyone with the source code could also have access to sensitive information, such as identification information. Also, if you have some application used for testing that are just a copy of the main product, you will want to keep the database variables in that application. You don't want to access the database of your main application from everything that is testing. So it will be better to have a variable that will serve as an identification for the database. Sometimes you will also want to change the variables without changing the code. It will be easier and safer to change these variables and restart the application so that it starts with the new values. Configuration variables are very effective for protecting sensitive information and for configuration. And finally, the last thing we are talking about are add-ons. As said before, they can be many things. A database like PSQL, a hiding system like Redis or Memcache, or even an advanced search system like Elasticsearch. This means that the build pack will create an instance ready to use add-ons. Once the code is executed, the add-ons will be ready to use. The service provider configures it for you. You can check the full list of add-ons at https://elements.heroku.com/add-on. Once we have the code ready and the dependencies installed with the configuration variants in place, that means we have a release. All releases are saved in Heroku. Now, let's say that we have deployed a new release which is a major critical mistake. To fix this, just go back to the previous release and everything will be back to normal. After the release are completed, they are given to the dynos to be executed. As the Heroku documentation says, we can imagine dynos as Linux machines in the cloud with capacities that can be changed as needed. One of the best things is the ability of cloud providers to scale applications as needed. It's done through dynos. So, if the calculation speed needs to be increased, you have to use a more powerful dyno. It works the other way too. It's important to specify that everything we have just mentioned is done automatically. The search of dependencies, the setting up of configuration variables and add-ons. Everything happens under the control of Heroku. The user only sends code changes to Heroku. You don't need to know all the steps. Although it's useful to know in case of a problem in order to identify where the problem comes from. Now that we know how Heroku creates applications, we will now focus on how the user can change the code of his application. Heroku offers 3 possibilities to change the code. Here they are. The first is the integration of GitHub. This allows you to connect your application to a GitHub folder. At each change, GitHub will understand that it will be necessary to keep the new code and rebuild the application by following the steps seen previously. The second one is Heroku.Git, which is an alternative and works similarly. You just have to make changes. And the third and last one is Docker. You can deploy Docker images in Heroku and manage that way. GitHub is the most recommended solution if your project involves more than 2 or 3 people, due to its features such as change and version checking. Now let's do a recap. It all starts with the changes made to the source code, which can be found in Heroku.Git. Then there are the automatic steps in this order: the search for dependencies and the creation of the files or data required, for example images. Then Heroku adds the configuration, then it installs the add-ons. Once all this is done, a release is created, which will be given to a dyno who can launch it. That's all for this video, and see you soon. Introduction to Heroku. This video will be about creating an account on Heroku. We will also start exploring the platform. We will therefore see a brief overview of Heroku, but we will see more details later. I'm already on Heroku.com. I'm going to press this button to create the account. You see that we now have a form to fill out. After completing it, you will get an email with an activation link. You will need to activate the account to log in. I'll give you a moment to fill it out on your own. I'm now in Heroku and this is my first login with this account. You can see the option to create a new application or a new team. We'll see later what the teams are for, but first we'll focus on how to create an application. First, we have to choose the name. We will call it That's fine. Then we choose the region. I'll choose Europe because that's where I am. We can now click on Create App. Here we are now on the Heroku dashboard. We can see the menu that we will see section by section. I can also open the application on the button Open App, which will open the URL of the application. We are going to do it right now. It says welcome to your application, and we also find documentation if we need it. For now, there is not much, but you can shape your application to serve your needs. I let you imagine what you want to do with it, whether it's for a store or a personal project. Okay, we can close this tab now. We are going to return to the menu and push on Overview. The first thing we see is the information on add-ons. We can consult, for example, Postgres, then we have dyno formation. We can see the number of dyno available that the application has. I remind you that the dynos are Linux machines that operate in the cloud. We also see collaborator activity that indicates who contributes to the application, when do the changes take place, etc. Guest activity shows the latest information about the application, such as the initial release made by Heroku when the application was created. Then we have logplex. It's the way Heroku uses to log all the information of the application. Now let's go to the resources side. It's here that you can configure the dynos and add-ons. You can increase and decrease the size of the dynos. You have to choose the language of the application first before you can change things. On the add-ons side, you can click on this button to find us on the add-ons marketplace. This list is very large. We can find a bit of everything according to your application, which will save you a lot of time. Let's take Redis as an example. This is what an add-on page looks like. We have several information. Lower we have the prices. These pages briefly explain everything about them. The next tab is Deploy. This is where you can manage everything related to the code that the application executes. We have the pipeline. We control there several applications that share the same database. So this is where we configure the test environment for the main application. Just below, we have the dependency method. There are three options as we saw before: Heroku Git, GitHub, and Docker. It's up to you to see which one suits you according to the advantages and disadvantages. Below, we just have a few examples of commands. Let's go to the metrics tab. This tab shows us, for the moment, not very much. Over the time, we will find a lot of information, such as the consumption of your dynos, the computing power, and many others that will be very useful. This tab will allow you to answer a lot of questions you might have. The Activity tab is quite meaningful by its name. Here are recorded the events related to the application during all its existence. At the moment, there are only two entries, the initial release and the logplex. In Access, you can invite people to collaborate with them. You have to press this button, but since what you see here is the free version, anyone I invite will have almost absolute control over the application. If you need to be more specific, you can create a team by clicking here. This will give you more control because you can choose what your users can do. You can create your team by clicking on this button. And finally, we have settings. The first thing is the possibility to change the world of the application. This will affect the URL of the application. In other words, the name should be unique in Heroku to avoid conflicts. Just below, we find the configure vars, or configuration variable. Further down, there is the build pack. Remember, this is what is responsible to compiling your application. After that, we can see the SSL certificates, used for security reasons that can be configured if you want more security between your server and your clients. Then there is domains. This is related to your domain name, so you can change it here. Underneath, you can transfer your ownership of the application to a third party. It will be the owner who will be responsible for paying the charge related to your application. To transfer the possession, be sure that the buyer is present in the team. Let's continue with maintenance mode. Activating it will put your application under maintenance to let all your users know. I will show you now what it looks like. Here we go. On the application side, there is a message that will inform everyone. This is the standard Heroku screen that's available, but you can obviously customize it. And finally, at the bottom, there is a button that allows you to delete the application. That's it for this first tour of the Heroku site for creating an application. I hope you can see a bit better how Heroku works thanks to this video. Next time we will talk about permissions and pricing. That's all for this video, but I'll see you soon for the Hello everyone and welcome to this introduction to Heroku. Today we will talk about permissions. That is what a user can do in relation to the application. How can you change what they can do and make sure that the right people have access to the right content? If in any way you have administrative responsibilities within the team, this lesson will be important for you. Heroku is divided into two permission sets. The free permission set, so the free part available with the basic version, the one you will have at the beginning, but you can also do a team enterprise, which is much better. We will see that later. It's much better in terms of permissions. In the free set, you will have an owner. That is the person who creates the application and who can add collaborators. Collaborators can do almost anything they want to the application they have been added to. They can change the code, change the add-ons, adjust the configuration variables, etc. They have almost all the permissions that the owner has, except that they can't delete the application and they can't touch the paying add-ons. So you have very limited control over what your employees can do. If you use the application on a larger scale, such as a company, it will be more prudent to consider creating a team enterprise. Let's talk about Team Heroku now. The first change in a team is that even if a person is a member, it does not mean that he or she gets full control over the application. Heroku can make a difference between people and applications, as you can see on this picture. For example, you have a front-end application and a back-end application. These are separate applications. If a back-end engineer is invited on a front-end application, it doesn't mean that he can see or do anything on the front-end application. Let's talk about the permissions of the beginning version of the application. There are three predefined rules: admin, member, and viewer. First, the admin, who, like the owner, has access to everything. He can do whatever he wants regarding the application and other people. This includes deleting the application and paying add-ons. You can have several admins in a group. The second one is the member. He can see all the application as well as the other team members. He can also create applications for the group, but it will be impossible for him to change the code and even everything related to the applications already created. The last one is the viewer. He can only see the applications. He will not be able to know anything about the other users and will not have access to general information about the team. Now that we have seen how roles work, let's move to application permissions. Heroku defines 4 types of permissions per application: view, deploy, operate, and manage. First, we have view. This allows the user to see information about the application. He can see the other users of the application and the activity, for example, code changes or mistakes that might happen. Then deploy, which gives access to the code recovery and gives the possibility to change the code that the application executes. It also gives access to configuration variables and free add-ons. With operate, you have the same permissions as with deploy. But in addition, you will have access to paid add-ons and you can also restart the application and manage the dynos that the application uses. And finally, with manage, you manage everything related to users. You can delete and add users and change their permissions. You can change the name of the application, change the owner, or delete the application. With manage, you're essentially an admin. Let's now do a recap. First, we have the free version, which has a lot of limitations when it comes to permission restrictions. On the team side, you can have more than one application. The permissions are managed per application on their own. When joining a team, a person can be an admin, a member that has less permissions, or a viewer with even more limited permissions. That's all for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this introduction to Heroku. This lesson will focus on the different costs that Heroku incurs. It can be hard to understand at first how things work in Heroku because there are many things to consider. By the end of this video, you will have a slightly clearer understanding of how Heroku charges for its services. First, let's start by understanding how dynos are constructed. There are 4 types of dynos. The first is the free one, which has the basic features like compiling the application, finding dependencies, creating a release, and running it. This dyno goes to standby after 30 minutes of inactivity. This means that when a dyno is in standby and you start it up again, it will take some extra time to be operational. These dynos also have a limited time of operation per month. For example, you can only have a dyno on for 1,000 hours per month. It's to be noted that this limitation of 1,000 hours is shared through the account. So if you have multiple applications using a free dyno, each application will draw from the reserve of hours. The next dyno is the hobby dyno. The main difference with the free dyno is that the hobby version does not go into standby. It no longer has the hour limitation. You can have it online 24 hours a day. It also provides you with an additional functionality that is to give you information of the last 24 hours on the application. You will have an overview of what is happening regarding the releases, the use of memory, the response time, etc. This dyno costs $7 per month. Now let's move on to professional dynos. They have all the functionalities that the hobby dynos have, but that's not all. For the standard version, it has horizontal upgrade ability. This means that you can add as many dynos as you want. Heroku will automatically distribute the work between all the dynos you have. In other words, Heroku balances all requests and divides them among all dynos so that there are no dynos with too much work and others that do nothing. The dynos will have about the same task volume. One of the other functionalities is a warning when a limit is reached. Let's say your dynos are consuming a high percentage of memory and they will soon run out. This can be a problem. It can be solved by setting up alerts, which will allow you to receive emails when these alerts are activated. Then we have the pre-boot function. It only works when you have more than one professional dyno working. It's important to understand that with each new release, there will always be downtime for the application, usually less than a minute. But 7 minutes is the time Heroku needs to prepare the new release. With pre-boot, you can avoid this downtime. Its function is to assign a dyno to execute the new release while the other dynos are still running the old release. Once the dyno that was in downtime starts running again, the other dynos that were on the old release can in turn go into downtime to switch to the new release. Regarding memory, for the standard 1x dyno, they have 512 MB of RAM, and the standard 2x have 1 GB of RAM. Now let's look at the last dyno, the performance. It provides the same functionality as the standard, but is additionally dedicated to the application. So while other applications will be in a machine with multiple dynos, with the performance dyno, you will get a dedicated machine that only executes the application. It also provides automatic upgrade capability. If, for example, the dyno notices during its observations that it needs more memory because its maximum limit is almost reached, it will automatically increase the dynos. For the dynos performance M, there is 2.5 GB of RAM, and for the L, 14 GB of RAM. It's important to know that you can have as many professional dynos as you need. The cost of dynos here is a bit complicated. It's mostly related to the use of dynos by the application. It can vary from a minimum of $25 to a maximum of $500 per dyno per month. We will now look at the cost of add-ons. Add-ons have a different way of charging for their services, so we are not going to talk about all the add-ons because it's impossible to explain everything and it will not help you. So I will concentrate on the basic cost of Postgres because it's one of the most used add-ons and the easiest to explain. With a free version, you can have up to 10,000 lines. If you exceed this limit, Heroku will not let you write more to this database. When you upgrade the basic version, which is the first paid version of Heroku that costs $9 per month, the limit increases to 10 million lines. There are other differences like backup capabilities, etc. We won't go into details for implicit reasons. The next element that impacts the cost are the teams. As said before, Heroku gives the possibility to create a team. This is an option that allows you to have a better control regarding the application permissions and the user. Heroku charges $10 per month if your group has more than 5 members. If there are 5 or less, the option is free. Heroku offers a solution to have continuous code integration by adding a step before creating a release. This step executes tests on the application and checks if it passes the tests. If it does, a release is created. If the tests fail, the release will not be created and the procedure stops. This means that there is a serious problem with the application. To activate this extra testing step, it will cost you an extra of $10 per month, but you will also be charged per minute that the dyno is running to perform the tests. The price of the continuous integration tool will cost you initially $10 plus the price of the dyno per month. So depending on the dyno used, the cost will be more or less consequent. Multiply by the number of minutes used divided by the total number of minutes in the month. So let's take an example for a use of 5 minutes in the month with a dyno performance M. A dyno performance M costs at least $250, so we have $10 base plus 250 multiplied by 5,000 uses divided by 43,200 minutes in a month. This would come to $10.03 for 5 minutes of use with the dyno performance M. The last possible cost is the premium support. When you are a Heroku client, you get access to support by default. However, if you need 24/7 support as well as responses within an hour, you might consider premium support. The price here is not fixed as it will depend on the size of your application and you will have to deal with the Heroku sales team. The only information is that the service price starts at $1,000 per month. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Today we will explore Heroku Postgres. I remind you that it's a database add-on. More precisely, it's a relational database. This means that you can link data together and create dependencies across the database. Data manipulation will affect the linked data. This management of relationships within the database is what primarily differentiates Postgres from other databases like MongoDB, where there are no relationships between data. Postgres is considered to be a highly scalable database. It can deliver good performance with small tables as well as with tables with millions of records. Because of this, Postgres is sometimes seen as the Swiss knife of database because it can be used for both small and large projects, for example, companies projects. This add-on is maintained directly by the Heroku team. In this lesson, we will start with the installation and setup of Postgres in Heroku. Then we will see an overview of Heroku functionalities in Postgres. After that, we will need to install some programs necessary to manage Postgres in the server. And finally, we will have an example of a table that we will manipulate with code. The code we will use will be simple so that we can understand it even if we have no knowledge of code. Let's start by using Postgres. I'm going to launch the application, go to Resources, and press Postgres. Here is it. I launched the free version. Now Postgres is installed right here. Before going any further, I want to go into the configuration variables. When Postgres was installed, Heroku created a configuration variable, database URL. It contains information to be able to access to the database. You can see this variable as the identification information of the database. This variable will be used in the code to connect to the database. Let's go back to resources. Starting with overview, you can find here a lot of information related to the database. For example, you can see primary. This means that this database is not a copy of another one. We can also see the version of Postgres that it's used, the creation date, the maintenance, that means the way the updates are managed by Heroku. The rollback, which is used when you have an error or corrupted data, so when the data of the database is ruined. With the rollback, it's possible to go back to when the database was healthy and fine. We have utilization, that shows the number of current connections and also the maximum number of connections that can be made at the same time. Then we have the durability side. This section is about protecting the database. Here you can make manual backups, as manual backups may not be sufficient in terms of security. Heroku also has a continuous protection. This means that there will be regular copies of the database. All these backups can be deployed in Postgres. In the settings, you can get the identification information. This is useful when you want to access the database externally. We will see that later. The last two commands speak for themselves. You can reset the database so it will delete all the data, and you can destroy the database. And finally, we have data clips. I will create one first. It's important to note that it's read-only. You can't do any manipulation like insert, update, or delete. So how does it work? First of all, you can put a title. For example, test. At this place, you will choose the database with which you want to interact. So, if in your account you have several applications with different Postgres, you will choose which one you will take and then save it and launch it. This is where you can write all your requests. For example, select, ID, from, etc. For the moment, this is not useful because our database is empty. One of the limitations of Heroku is that you can't manipulate the database directly. We will need an external tool to access Heroku Postgres and change it. So that's what we will do. We will install Postgres on our local machine. That's all for today, but I'll Hello everyone and welcome to the continuation of the Heroku Postgres tutorial. We are on postgresql.org and we will download and install Postgres. So you have to go to download, and I choose Windows because it's my operating system. Download the installer. I'm going to take the last version. That's it, the download is finished. We will proceed to the installation now. We'll let it like that. You can let everything checked, but the most important thing is to have pgadmin. We will need it to connect to Heroku. I let it like that. Now you have to choose a password. Next. We will let it like that too. Next. And I will get back to you as soon as the installation is complete. The installation is now complete. It's recommended to restart the machine because the program may not work as expected if you don't do it. Before going further, we will also need Git to be able to discover the code on Heroku. So I'm on git-scm.com. I'm just going to press the download button. Okay, it's downloading. Save. The download is now finished, so we are going to start the installation. Next, I let the configuration settings that are recommended. It's very fast. You let everything that is already checked and it will be fine. Git is now installed. To know if everything works, I will first enter Git. You can see all the information on the Git commands that are provided to us. So Git is well installed. There is only one thing left to install. It's the Heroku CLI. This will allow us to connect to the Heroku server and to change the code in an existing application. By combining the Git and the Heroku CLI, we will be able to deploy the test code used for this example. To download the Heroku CLI, you just have to go on Google and put Heroku CLI. You can go to this link. I will download the Windows version because it's my operating system. I save it. Now we are going to install it. So you can accept everything, next, and install. Now we just have to let the application do its installation. The installation is finished. We can now close the window. To test it, I will open the command guest. I'm going to put Heroku. We now have several commands to use with Heroku, so everything is fine. That's all for this installation video, but I'll see you soon for the rest of the lesson. Hello everyone and welcome to the next part of the Heroku Postgres tutorial. Now that we have everything installed and set up, I will create a table with pgadmin. To initialize Postgres, just enter pgadmin and run it. I will continue when it's running. The reason why we are using pgadmin is because we can't directly make changes to the database on Heroku. You need an external tool. I'm now going to connect to the Postgres server. You right-click on Server. First we push on Create and then Server. You will have information about the server that will appear. I will simply call it Adam Text Test App. I'm going to Connection, and this information here you have to get it from the add-on page. I'm going to copy the host. That's good. The port is good. Now the database. And it's good. This is where we should put it. So now we have the user and the password. That should be all you need to connect to the Postgres database. So we have the connections, the databases. There are several of them, by the way. You obviously don't have permission to access the ones that aren't yours. To find yours, you will first need to know its name. This one starts with D4. So you're going to search it in the menu, and here is it. It's the only one that does not have the little cross on the icon. I want to create a table, so I will open the file, create, and table. I will simply call the table visit. Its purpose will be to record on the table each visit to the application. Now the columns. I will add an ID that will be a git incremented with each new record in the database. This is what we need to insert. This will be our primary key. I'm also going to add a create date. So create-80, and here we choose timestamp. Save. Now we can see the visits here. Let's now create the node project which will create the visits. I'm going to open my command guest. I go to Heroku, npm init. We let the package in Heroku. Version is good, description too. In entry point, we are going to put app.js. This is not important, this is not important either. And we put yes. Now I want to install two dependencies. The first one is Postgres. For that, I will enter npm install pg. This will install everything related to Postgres. The second dependency is Express. It will help us to build the server. Every time the server receives a request, it will write the visit in the Postgres table. For that, I will enter npm install Express. There is only one thing left to do to get the code ready to deploy. It's the project. Our module is the folder with the Express and Postgres dependencies. All the dependencies will be here in package.json. There is the information about the server. Here we will have to teach Heroku how to launch the application. For that, you have to go here, press start, and then node app. It will then launch the app file using node. Everything is ready to be deployed. I'm going to close this window. I am now going to create a file that I'm going to call app.js. I'm here going to put the code for the visits. And that's it. I'm now going to open it, and I'm just going to paste the code in. You can just copy the code that you see. I'm not going to create it in front of you because the code part is not what we are interested in for this example. Here we are creating the servers with Express. This part is to create the connection with the Postgres database. And finally, this part of the code is what will fill the table. What we need to do now is send this code to be executed by Heroku. So first we go to Heroku, deploy. We can see that we have already installed the Heroku CLI. So the first thing to do is the logging. We put Heroku logging here. You can press any key. Now we have login. Normally it's good. I don't need to do this part because I don't have any code running. We can move on to the last 3 commands. Before we have to do the git init command because there is no git in this folder at the moment. Now we can put git add. Now that it's finished, we can put git commit -m and first commit. And now I can push the code. So git push Heroku master. As the code has been inserted, we have created a release and installed all the dependencies. The code is now deployed. That's it for Postgres. That's all for this video, and I'll see you soon for the Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction. The last sessions were about how to manage an application. This is all valid, but there are several situations where you can't just change the code. For example, let's say you have an application that is used by thousands of users. What happens when you go to change its code? You just change the code and you realize that there is a bug that makes the application crash or some other unexpected event. You can't keep the users with an application that crashes or bugs half the time. There are also possible problems when there are several developers working on the same file. If they all change the code at the same time, there will be conflicts in everyone's work. It's therefore necessary to have several applications that will have different rules. Some will be used for testing, and one that can be called production will be the one that will be online for the users. The solution that allows us to have several applications with the same code base is Heroku pipelines. This is the solution we will talk about today. To better understand, let's start with the path to take during the development. First, a person has an ID which is then translated into a development project. The developer codes on his computer and he will know that his project is finished and ready to be deployed into an application. How to go from development to deployment as fast as possible. This is the purpose of Heroku pipelines. Heroku can't code for the developer, nor can it give you code that is already developed. What Heroku can do is to do the hard part for you, the deployment phase and the infrastructure. Let's look at how Heroku helps with the development part. The development part happens mostly on the developer's computer. There is no real need for an application for this, but right after development and before deployment, developers will see how their code will act in a real application. Sometimes things just don't work in the application. Usually, after a development, there is a need to do additional tests to make sure that you have the desired results and to validate the new changes. Heroku creates the application tests with pre-built configurations. Heroku is able to create test applications in just a few minutes. This gives developers an application to see if the code works. Heroku is also very good at copying configuration variables like add-ons, etc. In just a few seconds, you can have a test application replicating the environment of the production application. This means that you can quickly check if changes can be validated or if there is a need for additional work. The goal here is to allow the developer to test and experiment as well as to make the developed code available for testing quickly. In the deployment part, things are a little bit different. The code is developed and you're confident of the changes since you have already verified that everything works with the test applications. You still need to see if the new code will not break the functionalities already in place. Usually, we use automatic tests for this. Even if you can do your tests manually, Heroku has a set of tests that it will run. If all tests pass, the new code will be deployed. If the code does not pass all the tests, it will not be validated, so it will not be deployed. This is mainly an extra security because you don't want code that will break your application. I am now going to Heroku and show you how this works. I am now on Heroku. I'm going to go to my application, deploy. Here we have what is related to pipelines. I'm going to click here. Since I don't have a pipeline, I will create one. Here we're going to put test pipeline. We choose right here production and now create. Now you see that we have two columns. This one is empty because we don't have any applications here. And this one is the application that the user will access, production. I will start by creating an application. I am going to call it Adam-text-staging. And now create. I now have one application in staging and one in production. You can move them. Now the application is in development. I don't have anything in staging anymore. You can also have several applications in the same column. You see here they are both in production. That would mean that they are at the same stage. I'm going to put it in staging. There is not much to say. You can set things up however you want. I'm now going to connect to GitHub. This will give access to some new functionalities related to pipelines. I'll go back to pipeline and you can see now that we have review apps. You can create, test things or just delete. They are made from pull requests that you have on GitHub. I'm going to activate it. We now have a configuration menu. Each option describes what it does. I will just turn it on and that's it. In my case, I don't have a pull request on my screen. But if there were, I could have created an application review. But how does it work? It's important to understand that these applications share more or less the same code. The production version, which is here, is usually the most stable version of the code, while the other versions are still under development. Only when everyone agrees that the code is good, it's merged with the production application. Each team has its own way of managing their projects and when to merge the code. But there are several strategies online that you can find to get organized. That's all for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Where are we? We have several applications with different development stages. In this lesson, we will go into more detail on how to manage Heroku pipelines. The last lesson was an overview. We will go into more detail on how to work with pipelines. How is the code of each application managed? We learned that there are several stages of development. Staging, development, production, and also the reviews app, which are throwaways. Even if all these applications share the same base, the same source code, they are independent. While some are used for testing, a production app is used as the main app for the public. But now, how to manage the code of these independent and separate applications? This is where Git comes in. Since Git is one of the requirements for this lesson, I won't go into too much detail about Git. Git allows you to create branches, sections that are copies of code that can be changed independently. As you can see on this picture, there are 3 branches, one called dev, one master, and one staging. These branches are totally independent. Depending on which branch you change the code on, it will affect one of the applications. If, for example, you make a coming on dev, it's in the dev environment. It will only affect the application that is in development. Same for master, it will only affect production, and staging will affect staging. Let's say that you're happy with your progress in the dev environment, and it's time to put everything into production. Git offers merge. This means that the code merged into one. Merge doesn't mean that an application will disappear. It just means that the dev branch and the master will have the same code. So the applications will also have the same code. This correlation between Git and Heroku pipeline is the way Heroku offers to avoid infrastructure problems. Now that we have talked about how to manage the code of all applications, it's now important to talk about how to move the configurations. Let's say you want to create applications with add-ons and configuration variables already pre-configured, and you want to import configurations already made from another application. How to do this without having to copy all this manually to each copy of the application? In all applications with all languages, you can find in the root folder of the project a file called app.json. This JSON is important for Heroku because with it you can configure everything in the application. On this link there is an explanation of how an app.json works. What we see is a complete explanation of how it works. These things, name, description, keywords, website, repository, logo, success, etc. are mostly descriptions for us humans to understand it. It doesn't have any impact on the configuration. Here there is, for example, the dyno used, and so on. Now for the architecture, we will cover the advantages and disadvantages of each case. Your choice really depends mainly on the size of your team. The architecture used for a 2-person team doesn't necessarily need the complexity that a large team does. The first one I'm going to talk about is a 2-layer architecture. It's simple with just staging and production. If you have a small team with 1 or 2 developers, this is the one you should use. You can organize yourself to know which person is doing which part of the code and therefore not to conflict with each other. For this, you will need the master branch for the production environment. You can have your test in staging and just merge everything into production when everything is working. Now let's look at the 3-layer architecture. When a team has more than 2 or 3 people, things get chaotic if everyone changes the code in staging. Since it's just testing, it's possible that each person will do their commit without realizing that they are interfering with the work of others. So it's better to let the staging part when the code is ready and we go to testing. That's why developers will use review apps, and when they think the code is ready to be tested, they can suggest to staging it, test everything, and then release it to production if the tests are successful. The 4-layer architecture is used when the team has a large number of people. It's possible that the code in staging remains there for several days. Given the size of the team, it's also possible that the team wants to prepare the deployment of the next code. While the code is being tested in staging, the next deployment can be prepared in development. As said before, these architectures depend on your team, so you can see which one fits your team best. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this introduction to Heroku. When you do a test, it's important to check that the code is correct so as not to ruin the functionalities already implemented. This validation that everything is working is mainly done in the form of automatic tests. When there is a new code to test, Heroku checks if all tests have passed. It's possible to configure this so that the code can only be deployed if all tests are passed. This solution creates a test environment for passing tests. It's called Heroku Continuous Integration or Heroku.CI and is integrated with the pipelines. When there is a code change, the first thing Heroku does is create a new application to test it and a new environment for that application, and once the tests are finished, everything is destroyed, erased. In other words, every time you commit, Heroku will create a new environment that will run the new code. It's also possible to configure this so that the code is only deployed if it passes all the tests. These automatic tests are very useful to make sure that you don't deploy code with bugs to the main application. Apart from that, you can also configure the dynos that will be used to run the tests. This is especially useful if your build is quite large and needs some time to run the tests. This means that you can speed up the testing through the dynos and make the creation of the build faster. In the pipelines, you can have different specific Heroku CI configurations for each application. So you can have in one application a certain test to pass in order to deploy it, while others, the code will be deployed immediately without passing this test. As you know, Heroku can handle almost any language and any framework. This is only possible because Heroku follows the test anything protocol. At the end of the tests, the program returns a 0 if the tests fail or a 1 if all tests passed. Since Heroku uses the test anything protocol, how do you know that the results of your framework will not really have an impact? By the time you can send Heroku a 1 or a 0, Heroku will know what to do with these results. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Today we will talking about how to join Salesforce and Heroku. The goal of this section will be to present ways to combine Salesforce and Heroku together. There will be several alternatives to do this, as well as practical examples. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to create integrations between Salesforce and Heroku. But first, what do we mean by integration between Salesforce and Heroku? Essentially, it means that data stored in Heroku is connected to data stored in Salesforce. This implies that a change in one side will affect the other side. But even if the changes on one side are reflected on the other platform, they are still on different and independent databases. But why would you want to integrate them? Integrating these tools means that you have the functionalities of Heroku to create and manage web applications quickly and easily. You will also have the tools to manage and develop web applications. And meanwhile, everything will be powered by Salesforce CRM, which excels in customer management and business logic. Some businesses depend entirely on Salesforce and Heroku to get their products to their customers. Let's do a quick example of what this application can look like. For example, let's say you are creating a program for a bank. Salesforce would be used to power and manage the business logic. It would be a good idea to put all the automatic process related to transferring money to another bank or entity. For example, during the day, there will be normal transfers that the bank will have to ensure for all these customers. There should also be a security process, like if suspicious activities take place, an alarm will be triggered, which should be checked and validated by a human operator to see if these are frauds or not. Also, in Salesforce, it should be possible to see all the financial information of the bank. For example, is it making profits? How much does it have? However, there is still an important part to do, and that is, how can a customer interact with the bank? How can a customer check things like an IBAN, make bank transfers, and all those actions you expect from an online bank? Well, this is where Salesforce isn't really a good fit anymore. A web application is not really what it was created for. This is where Heroku comes in. With its pipelines and add-ons, you can make applications like an online bank very quickly, and it will be scalable. You can use Heroku to make an app where customers can see their financial status, bank transfers, general information, and also interact with the bank. If we take this example in consideration, part of the bank's operations come to Salesforce and part to Heroku. There is a need for a solution to share information between these two platforms. Now the question is, how can you integrate these two platforms? We will see three solutions to link these two separate databases and make their respective data available to them. But why do we need several solutions for integration? Actually, one may be enough, but we will talk about several of them and we will see their advantages and disadvantages so you can choose the one that suits you best. The three solutions we will use in the next videos are Heroku Connect, Outbound Messages, and API REST. For these solutions, during the next videos, we will have theoretical explanations and practical examples. That's all for this video, but I see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Before we start the integrations, we will first see an overview of Salesforce and how does it work. To do this, I'm going to go to Salesforce and give you an overview of it and how to use it. The first thing you need to know is what type of organization you want for this lesson. If you go to the Salesforce website, you can create a normal Salesforce organization. The problem with that is that it's a trial account, which means it's pretty limited. So you won't be able to use all the integrations that will be presented in this lesson. That's why I recommend creating a developer sandbox. The difference is that these sandboxes are made to let developers experiment with Salesforce. There is no limitation in terms of functionalities for developers in this type of sandbox. Because of that, it has all the functionalities that we need for this lesson, so I recommend you to try the developer sandbox first. You won't have any limitation in functionality, and on top of that, it's free. For your information, to get the same functionalities with the normal sandbox, it will cost you about $200 per month. But how to get this developer sandbox? For that, you need to go to developer.salesforce.com. And here you can create an account. By completing this form, Salesforce will send you an email to confirm your account. I'll be back when I'll be connected on the account. So I'm now on my developer account. What is important to know is that Salesforce allows you to create tables. You can use them to manage your business. For example, Salesforce comes directly with the account object right here. This allows you to keep track of all the accounts that exist in your organization. Let's take an example. Let's say you are a bank. You have customers. You can use the account object to have a view on all your customers. Account is typically used for this kind of context, like managing associated customers, etc. So this table is quite practical. Another important object is cases. It's typically used when a customer wants to communicate with your organization. For example, let's say you have a portal or a website where customers can communicate with you. What you can do is every time a customer writes something to you, you create a new case. Then someone from your team can take care of it and manage it with cases. In leads, you can keep information about your potential future customers. You can assign someone to look into leads to find and convert these people into customers. Salesforce provides a lot of code-related function and solutions that can bring some automatization to your business. But why are these tables important and relevant to us? Because tables like account, cases, and leads are where all the data in Salesforce is stored. All of your data will be in a table, so to integrate Salesforce and Heroku, what we're essentially doing is sending the data stored in these objects to Heroku. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Let's start the integrations with Heroku Connect. Among the solutions we will see, Heroku Connect is the one with the least development time. With a few clicks, you can make the data of Salesforce available in the Heroku application. Heroku Connect converts Salesforce objects and their content into a Postgres table in Heroku. This add-on is only available in combination with Heroku Postgres add-on. So for you to use it, you will need to have Heroku Postgres installed in your application. Let's make an example of how this would work. Let's say you have a table with 3 fields: first name, last name, and age. Let's say we have someone named John Ross who is 21 years old. Pretend then there is a change on Heroku from 21 years old to 22 years old. Connect will force this change on its sources and change the age on this side as well by synchronizing the data on both platforms. Now let's pretend there is a change in Salesforce. The last name changed from Ross to Destin. This data will be transferred to Heroku and the synchronization will take place between the platforms. There is something to consider when you use Heroku Connect. More specifically, how often is the data synchronized between the two platforms? This obviously depends on the plan you choose. Currently, Heroku Connect has 2 types of offers. The free offer, you will have up to 10,000 rows synchronized between the 2 databases, but the number of rows containing your tables cannot exceed 10,000. The free offer does not have the accelerated synchronization. That means that the synchronization can take up to 10 minutes. In case you need more than 10,000 rows or you don't want to wait until 10 minutes, you can consider the Shield or Enterprise option. These are paid options. Salesforce doesn't really disclose their algorithm used to calculate the price, so there are very large variations depending on the amount of data that needs to be synchronized. With this package, the synchronization will be done every 2 minutes, and you will also have access to an accelerated synchronization that is done almost instantly. You will have a real-time synchronization between Heroku and Salesforce, but it's up to you to decide which of these packages is best for your needs. It's also possible that you need more than the free-form offers, but the Shields package is too expensive. That's why we have the other solutions that will be presented in the next lessons. Before we move on to practical parts, let's talk about the limitations that are known to Heroku Connect. Firstly, files and attachments can't be synchronized. If you want to store a file or synchronize it, you won't be able to do it. Heroku recommends that these files are stored using, for example, Amazon Web Service or another hosting service. Secondly, it's possible to do a partial synchronization. You can't partially synchronize a table or an object. When they are synchronized, you can choose which table or object should or not should be synchronized. That's all for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Let's start the integrations with Heroku Connect. Among the solutions we will see, Heroku Connect is the one with the least development time. With a few clicks, you can make the data of Salesforce available in the Heroku application. Heroku Connect converts Salesforce objects and their content into a Postgres table in Heroku. This add-on is only available in combination with Heroku Postgres add-on. So for you to use it, you will need to have Heroku Postgres installed in your application. Let's make an example of how this would work. Let's say you have a table with 3 fields: first name, last name, and age. Let's say we have someone named John Ross who is 21 years old. Pretend then there is a change on Heroku from 21 years old to 22 years old. Connect will force this change on its sources and change the age on this side as well by synchronizing the data on both platforms. Now let's pretend there is a change in Salesforce. The last name changed from Ross to Destin. This data will be transferred to Heroku and the synchronization will take place between the platforms. There is something to consider when you use Heroku Connect. More specifically, how often is the data synchronized between the two platforms? This obviously depends on the plan you choose. Currently, Heroku Connect has 2 types of offers. The free offer, you will have up to 10,000 rows synchronized between the 2 databases, but the number of rows containing your tables cannot exceed 10,000. The free offer does not have the accelerated synchronization. That means that the synchronization can take up to 10 minutes. In case you need more than 10,000 rows or you don't want to wait until 10 minutes, you can consider the Shield or Enterprise option. These are paid options. Salesforce doesn't really disclose their algorithm used to calculate the price, so there are very large variations depending on the amount of data that needs to be synchronized. With this package, the synchronization will be done every 2 minutes, and you will also have access to an accelerated synchronization that is done almost instantly. You will have a real-time synchronization between Heroku and Salesforce, but it's up to you to decide which of these packages is best for your needs. It's also possible that you need more than the free-form offers, but the Shields package is too expensive. That's why we have the other solutions that will be presented in the next lessons. Before we move on to practical part, let's talk about the limitations that are known to Heroku Connect. Firstly, files and attachments can't be synchronized. If you want to store a file or synchronize it, you won't be able to do it. Heroku recommends that these files are stored using, for example, Amazon Web Service or another hosting service. Secondly, it's possible to do a partial synchronization. You can't partially synchronize a table or an object. When they are synchronized, you can choose which table or object should or not should be synchronized. That's all for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this introduction to Heroku. Now for the practical part, we will first have to create an account on Salesforce. To be able to create a Connect account, we must have a valid Salesforce account. Secondly, we will have to configure Heroku Connect so that it's linked with the Salesforce account. Thirdly, we will synchronize our first tables between Heroku, Postgres, and Salesforce. For this example, we will use the Accounts object. Fourthly, we will create a new Salesforce account entry. When we validate it, it will be sent to Heroku and will be available for use. And finally, we will make a change on the Heroku side, verifying that it has been sent to Salesforce. So for the first step, go to developer.salesforce.com and go to sign up to create the account. Fill out the form. Salesforce will send you a confirmation email and then you will get a free sandbox that you can use. I am now on my account and you can see that we have here accounts. This table will be our goal to synchronize with Heroku during this lesson. First, we are going to create a connection with Heroku and this table. You can click right here. I am now going to create an account just right here. And I'm going to write test accounts. Just here 123 Victor Hugo Street. That will be enough for our test. I'm going to save it. So we have a new account. What you see here is the information related to this account, but for the moment it's quite empty. The reason I made this account is to see if it transfers to Heroku once we set it up. This is a new application. It has nothing in it. Click on it and then in Resources. The first add-on added is Heroku Postgres. This add-on is necessary so that Heroku Connect can put data from Salesforce. Heroku Postgres. We are going to take the free version. We have Postgres. We will now need Heroku Connect. These are the two add-ons we will need for this lesson. Let's start with the configuration of Heroku Connect. Here we have setup connection. We can let it like that because it's the only database we have. So next. Authorize. Here allow. I'm asked for my Salesforce credentials, login, allow, and everything is fine. The idle shows that everything went well. I'll go now to mappings, create mapping, I'm going to choose account. So now we can see on this screen that we have a lot of information. Here is the information related to the writing of the database, so Postgres by Salesforce. Here we have the frequency at which the synchronization will be performed. It's currently set to 10 minutes. Here you have the accelerated synchronization, but since we use the free version, it doesn't concern us. Here is the opposite. We have the information related to the writing of the data on Salesforce by Postgres. If you don't click on this box, Postgres will simply not send any changes to Salesforce. So any changes made directly to this database will be lost the next time you synchronize it. I'm going to click on it because I want the synchronization to go on both sides. You can see here that I got a warning. This is simply because on Postgres I currently have no way to create IDs. If I add an entry, Postgres will have no way to stick an ID on it the way Salesforce would. Postgres will not be able to identify an entry if it's created on Postgres. To fix this, you will need to create a field in account that is unique. It will appear here and you can choose it. We have now different fields in accounts. I'm just going to add billing street because that's what I filled in the account that I created earlier. I'm going to let the rest of it stay that way. You can of course choose the field that you want. I'm going to save it. We have again the warning about the ID. It's not very important for our example, so we are going to skip it. Account is now synchronized between Salesforce and Heroku. We have some information like here, the number of things that have been selected, the number of entries on Salesforce and number of entries in Postgres. I will now open pgadmin to check the data that has been synchronized. If it's not already done, you need to add the Postgres database to pgadmin. To do this, we have to go to Create, Server, for the name we're going to put Heroku Connect Test. And now connect. To fill in this information, you have to go to Heroku. Postgres. Here we have settings and view credentials. These are the data you have to insert. Now we have to copy and paste everything we need. We save it and that's it. I am now connected. I am now going to search my database. Here is it. Now I'm going to Schema, Salesforce, table, and this is the one we are interested in, accounts. Here we can see all the accounts that have been synchronized. If you remember, in Heroku Connect there are 14 entries, and here we can also see 14 entries. The last entry is the account that I created earlier. And we can see that in the billing street parts, there is the address that I chose before. Now, the last thing I want to do is to change one of the fields. I'm going to change the address, so the billing streets. We are going to change it to show that the data is transferred from Postgres to Salesforce. I am now going to change it and I can save. You can see here that it's switched to synchronize. This means that the information has been updated and Heroku has taken care of it. This is no waiting or doing another synchronization. The data has been sent to Salesforce, but usually you have to wait about 10 minutes before the synchronization is done automatically. We are back on Salesforce and you can see here that the billing address field has been updated. The number has changed because I changed it before. My data is transferred in both directions. That's all for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this introduction to Heroku. Today's lesson will be an exercise where we will create a new mapping for the contact object of Salesforce. We will synchronize the first name, last name, and email fields. Then we will create a new entry on Salesforce that will be in contact. The fields are the first name, John, and the last name, Ross. To finish the exercise, we will need to change the email from pgadmin to john.ross@gmail.com. We will just have to check that the data has been transferred to Salesforce. Let's do it now. I am now on my Heroku account on the application that we have previously configured. So I'm going to go to Heroku Connect. And I'm going to configure it so that I have the new table, which is contact. We go to mappings and create a new one. I am now looking for contact. And here is it. I press just right here. And here is the warning from last time. But this time I'm also informed that I need the last name field, so it's a requirement. So I need first name, email, and last name. These are the requirements. Now I can save it. I only needed these 3 fields. And you can see that the contact has been synchronized. I am now going to Salesforce to create the new contact. Here I am on Salesforce. I'm going to go to contact and create a new one. I click on new. And here I just have to fill in what I'm interested in. So first name John and last name Ross. So here the part account name is normally required. We have to put the name of an account for this contact. You click here and I'm going to put the account that I created the previous lesson. And save. If you don't have an account to put here, you can create one in the part Account. The account is now created, as you can see here. What we want to do now is to change the email from pgadmin. So I'm going to open it. We are now on pgadmin. Now we want to go to our database. And here is it. We just click on Schema, Salesforce, Tables, and then Contacts. View and all rows. We are now in Contacts. If we go down, we can see the contact we have created. What we want to do now is to change the email address. So john.ross@gmail.com. And we can save it. Now I will wait a few minutes for the synchronization to take place. Back on Salesforce, we can see that the email address has been updated, it has been synchronized. We got everything we wanted and validated our goals. We can now say that we are done with Heroku Connect. That's it. And that's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction. Today we are going to talk about the second way to integrate Salesforce and Heroku, outbound messages. There are several things that are different compared to the other method. However, since there are almost no limitations in terms of outbound data and no additional costs, this solution may be the right one for your problem. First of all, what is an outbound? An outbound is a message that Salesforce sends to an external application such as the Heroku application. This message will typically be made following an update or an insertion in a table. For example, you update your table by changing the value of one of the fields. This will cause an outbound message which is going to be sent to an external application. What do we need to set up an outbound? We need three things: an object, so a Salesforce table. This means that there will be an outbound associated with the table. A change in one of the fields in the table will send an outbound message from the updated field. The second thing needed is a rule associated with the outbound. The purpose of this rule is to filter the data that you don't want to send with the outbound message. And finally, the last thing needed is an external application that will receive the outbound message. Here you can use, for example, a Heroku application that will receive the outbound message and process it. It can, for example, store its data in a database for later use. Let's see an example of how it works. Let's say that we develop an application that manages the collaborators of a company. There is a Salesforce table, Accounts, where we keep track of his collaborators. So we pretend that there is a collaborator with the following fields: name, company X, type, collaborator, and the phone number of the company. Let's say that there is a rule for the type of collaborators and that only the accounts with the type collaborator will be outbound. If one day there is a new number, it will cause an outbound message. Since it's a collaborator type, the rule will validate the message. Since the rule has validated, this means that the outbound message will be sent by Salesforce to the external application. Now, let's consider the same example, but this time with a different account. The name of the company is Company Y, the type is customer, and the phone number. Let's say again that there is a change in the phone number, but this time the type is not collaborator, is customer. So the outbound message will not be sent. Now that we have a better picture of how Salesforce handles outbound message, let's take a look at the receiving of this message. How the external application will get the request and stop it. Outbound messages are generated in XML format. This is a quite old format which was more popular a few years ago. Nowadays, it's replaced by other formats such as JSON, for example. Dealing with these answers can be complicated because if you're using a language like Node, you don't really have an easy way to deal with XML files. So you will need some kind of analyzer to convert that table into something that the language can handle easily. Now let's say you have already analyzed the data and done what you need to do with it. How do you respond to the Salesforce request? How do you tell it that it went well or not? Salesforce gives you two options. The first one is ACK, A-C-K, which means acknowledge. In this context, it's an acknowledgement. It signals that the process was successful. For example, you can send an ACK after the table has been processed and stored in the database. The second one is NAK, which stands for not acknowledge. When you send an ACK to Salesforce, Salesforce will understand that the process was a failure and it will continue to try to send that message for 24 hours. If after these 24 hours Salesforce has not been acknowledged, it will automatically cancel that request and stop trying to send it again. Now let's talk about limitations. The biggest limitation that outbound messages have is that they are unidirectional. This means that only Salesforce will send these outbound messages to Heroku application. So outbound messages are the best option when there is no need for interaction from the opposite side. Another limitation is that deleting data does not cause outbound messages. For example, if you delete a column or a row in Salesforce, it's not possible to set up an outbound message to signal this deletion. In conclusion, with outbound messages, you can send to an external application a table every time there is a change. The external application will process the request and it will store the data for use on the application. Outbound messages is the option with the least limitation when it comes to Heroku data. It's therefore the option to consider for the Salesforce and Heroku integration. But its unidirectionality means that it's not always the first option to be considered. That's all for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Today we are going to set up the outbound and make the data sent by Salesforce be sent to Heroku. First, we will deploy the code that will handle the outbound. We will take a quick look at the code to see what it does and move it so that our application is ready to use it. Next, we will create the outbound rule on Salesforce and then we will configure it in such a way that at any change to the case object, an outbound message will be sent so that the application we have created can read it. And finally, we will validate that everything has been sent and processed. Now, let's look at the code that will allow the Heroku application to receive outbound messages in XML format and convert them to JSON. What we see first are the node models required for this application. The body parser is what will analyze the body of the message. The XML body parser will check if the file is an XML. If it is, it will automatically process it and convert it to JSON. After that, it is just the code that is needed for a server to start. It will simply make the server start and the application be ready to receive the outbound. Now let's go to this side. The first things on this file are the ACK and NACK. If you remember the previous lesson, these are the responses that we provide to Salesforce, when in the case of an ACK, the operation was successful, and in the case of a NACK, the operation was unsuccessful. Once again, since the code is not the primary focus on this lesson, I'm not going to tell more about it. You can simply copy everything you see there if you want to try to produce the operation yourself. Now I'm going to put this code on Heroku so that we can start receiving outbound messages from Salesforce. To deploy code, what we need to do is first go to the application, go to deploy, and we can just follow the instructions that are right here. So now I'm going to deploy the code. Having already done these first 3 commands and being already logged into my command guest, I don't need to do them. I just need to do the commands that are just right here. So I open up my command prompt, which again is already connected to Heroku. Git add point, git commit and the little message. Here first commit. And finally git push Heroku master. And that's it. The code is now deployed and ready to be used. I will now go to my Salesforce account to be able to set up outbound messages. Back on Salesforce, I go to Setups. I write Workflow Rules. Continue. And I'll create a new one. So, new rule. I'm going to choose the case object. Next. And for the name, we'll keep it simple, outbound case. Here we have the evaluation criteria. There are 3 options for sending outbound messages. The first one is to write an outbound message as soon as a case is created, the second one when a case is created or modified, and the third one is the same as the 2 previous ones and offers a customization of other criteria below. And I'm going to choose the second option. This bar will be used to filter the data you want to send as said in the previous lesson. Today I don't want to add any more parameters than that, it will be a simple rule. For this I will put formula evaluate to true and here true. Save and continue. Here is the rule I just created. Now we just need to have an associated action. To add an outbound, you go here. New outbound message. For the name, I will let the same, outbound case. This is done automatically. As for the endpoint URL, it will be the URL of your application. To find it, just go to your application. You just have to copy it, We put it here, and at the end we add /case. This is the URL to which Salesforce we send the outbound message. I'm going to send all the fields. Add, and then here we go. Now all these fields will be sent in the outbound message. You can of course choose to send just some of them. I'm going to save it. And that's it. We have the rules, so every time there is a new case created or a modification, this outbound message will be sent to our application. Done. And don't forget to activate the rule. We have now configured everything. What we have to do now is to create a case. So I press on it, New, and before I create it, I'm going to go into my application. I'm going to go into my logs. Here we'll see a log when the application receives the request from Salesforce. I can go back to Salesforce to create my case. I'm not going to fill in these boxes. For the type, we'll put mechanical. Case reason installation. We will let it on new. Medium. Web. What I fill in just right here are not real data, it's just for the example. I will save it. You can see that the case has been created. I'll go back to my logs. You can see the list of the outbound. There is the information that we just put in. Now we will see what happens when we send a NAC to Salesforce. I'm going to change the priority from medium to low. Save. The code is configured so that it checks if the priority is low. If it is, a NAC is sent to Salesforce. Because of the rule we have set up, this modification will cause an outbound to be sent. You can see that we have received the outbound message with the priority low. You can also see that we have received another request, even more than one, even though we have not made a new change. Since Salesforce received a NAC, it tries to resend the data again. I will go back to Salesforce to show you how to tell if a request has failed. Setups, outbound, monitor, and you can see here we have the outbound message ID. The object is the ID of the failed case. Salesforce has already tried to send it 4 times. The reason for the failures is here. Here you have the time and the date of the attempt, and here the time and date of the next attempt. Salesforce will continue to try to send it for 24 hours, and after that time it will give up and do nothing more with that request. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone, and welcome to this introduction lesson to Heroku. Today we are going to do a little exercise. First, we will have to deploy the code that will process the outbound. To do this, simply follow the instructions in the deploy section of other applications. Then we will have to go to Salesforce and create an outbound for the case comments with the endpoint case comments. And finally, create a case comments on an existing case and validate with the log that this has been transferred and received. Please note that in order to create a comment on a case, you must first create a case. To create the comment, you have to go to the page of the case. By going further down, you can create it. Now you can stop the video if you want to try to do these steps. I will now show you the solution. To deploy the code, what you have to do is go to deploy, and you just have to follow the written steps. As I have already done these steps on the previous video, I will not do them again. So I go directly to Salesforce. I go once again to Setup. And I'm just going to type Workflow Rules. You can see that I already have my outbound case just right here. I am now going to create a new rule. I choose case comments. Next. Note that in order to see the outbound comment rule, you don't need to have an outbound case rule. They are completely independent. And you just have to follow these steps. Save and next. Now we just associate the action, new outbound message. And just fill in these fields. Here we are going to transfer all the fields. And save. I press done. We can now activate it. Now we have configured the outbound for the box comments. Now I'm going to cause this outbound. To do this, I'm going to go to case. I'm just going to create a new one. And now just save it. If we go down, we can see the case comments section. New. Here we just write the comment. Before saving, I will open the logs of the application. That's it. Now we are going to save it. And if I go back to Heroku, you can see my comment. This is a test exercise. It has just been created, as you can see. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Today we are going to do a little exercise. First of all, we will have to deploy the code that will handle the outbound. You just have to follow the instruction in the deploy section of your application. Then you have to go to Salesforce and create an outbound for the case comments with the endpoint case comment. And finally, you have to create a case comment on an existing case and validate with the logs that it has been transferred and received. It should be noted that to create a case comment, you must first create a case. To create the comment, you have to go to the page of the case and create it in the bottom part. You can now pause the video if you want to try these steps. I will now show you the solution. To deploy the code, we need to go to deploy and follow the written steps. As I have already done these steps in the previous video, I will not do them again. I will go directly to Salesforce. Now I'm going to Setups. I type Workflow Rules. You can see that I already have my outbound case just right here. I will now create a new rule just here. Here we have to choose case comment. It's important to know that if you want to have an outbound comment rule, there is no need to have an outbound case rule. They are independent. To keep it simple, I will call it outbound case comment. I choose the second option, so formula evaluates to true. And here, true. Save and next. Now we associate the action, new outbound message, outbound case comment, and in endpoint URL, it's your address that we find on your application, just right here. Don't forget to add /case comment at the end. I'm going to add all the fields and save. Done. And don't forget to activate the rule. So that's it. We have set up the outbound for the case comments. Now I'm going to close the outbound. To do this, I'm going to go to case. I'm just going to create a new one. New, hi, and phone. That will be enough. Save. If I go down, you can see the case comment section. New. And I'm going to write this is a test comment. Before I save it, I'm going to go to my application to check the logs. That's it. Now I can save it. And if I go back to Heroku side, you can see my message. There is the time and the date it was created. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Today, let's talk about the native integration of the Salesforce API REST. The goal here is to synchronize the data between Salesforce and Heroku. But how does it work? Salesforce uses an architecture where each object is an independent table. Each table uses fields that you can use to store information and manipulate them to fit the business logic. Salesforce allows you to manipulate all these tables through API REST calls or requests. In other words, all tables can be accessed and manipulated through the API REST. This API can then be accessed through external applications such as a Heroku application. You can, by default, create new entries for tables, update any field, read data from tables, as well as delete columns from tables. It works like a normal RESTful API. Let's see an example to understand how it works. Let's consider that we have a landing page. The purpose of this page is that the person who comes across this page will sign up for a newsletter using his email address. Let's say you are using Salesforce to manage all the emails and to send them promotions, secondary products, etc. In order to start these emails, you will need to send them to Salesforce first so that they can be used later. What we can do here is create the landing page and post it to Heroku. Now, when someone enters and gives their email, an API request is made to Salesforce using a native API to create a new entry in a table with the provided email. In this simple example, you can see how it's possible to create information within Salesforce. Let's take a closer look at how the REST API works. This is the endpoint you need to look for in order to perform any action in the account object. Let's take things step by step to better understand. First, in the endpoint is the instance. This is the URL you provide to Salesforce when you sign up on the platform. Then, service, data, and the version tells Salesforce that we are interested in manipulating the data. That means that the request sent is related to an action on data. And finally, the last two parts, objects and accounts, indicate which object we are accessing. If you want to access to another object, you will have to change these last two parts of the endpoint. Instead of handling this request by yourself, it's recommended to find an external library that can do this. This library can make it easier and make the process of doing the integration faster. For example, as we will see in the practical part, with Node you have JSForce, which is a library with methods already built and developed so that you can interact easily and safely with the Salesforce REST API. If you don't use Node, don't worry. There are equivalent libraries for almost all languages that are supported by Heroku. Like, for example, Simple Salesforce for Python and Salesforce-datacom-api.java.client for Java. There are two limitations that you should be aware of when choosing the Salesforce REST API. The first one is that there is a limit to your requests. They must be a maximum of 3 megabytes in size. This means that no matter what you do in terms of inserting or updating, your request cannot exceed 3 megabytes. You also can't interact with more than 2000 rows per request. The second limit is that Salesforce limits the number of API calls it receives per day. So for example, depending on your Salesforce account type, you have a limit on the number of calls you are allowed per day. Therefore, before you decide to use the REST API, it's advisable to estimate how many requests you expect to have per day and validate that you have a margin left in terms of the maximum number of requests. In conclusion, REST API requests are a practical solution for managing data on Salesforce. By nature, these REST API requests are a bit slower than using, for example, Heroku Connect. Because when you make a request through the native API, you will need to go from the client browser to the Heroku application, which will make a request to Salesforce. The REST API should be avoided when dealing with highly changeable data. For example, if the data you are sending through the REST API is going to change several times a day, the REST API shouldn't be considered because due to this, there will be a large number of requests and this could affect the speed and performance of an application. On the other hand, if your data is, for example, configuration data, which does not change often, or simply data that is not modified several times a day, the REST API is the recommended option because you will have your data synchronized between Salesforce and Heroku in real time and at a lower cost. The REST API is a great tool to have in general for the use of Salesforce because it can help you upload large amounts of data to Salesforce or take back data at a much lower price than, for example, Heroku Connect. That's it for this video, but I'll see you soon for the next one. Hello everyone and welcome to this Heroku introduction lesson. Today we are going to create the necessary code that will insert a new account via the REST API in Salesforce. We will first deploy it on Heroku, then make a request that Heroku will send via a RESTful API to Salesforce to create this account. And finally, we can validate that the account has been created on Salesforce. The goal here will be to understand how to build Salesforce requests using the Node.js library, that is JSForce, in order to manipulate data on Salesforce via, for example, the Heroku application. But first, let's take a look at the code. What we have here is an Express server. When it receives a request, it will create another request for Salesforce and create an account from there. These first lines are to create a new Express server. Then we import JSForce, which is the library we're going to use to connect to Salesforce and make requests via the REST API. Here we will create an endpoint to account, and when we receive this request we have this function. It connects to Salesforce using the credentials provided. If it manages to connect, it will connect to the account object, and this is the action we want to produce. So create in this case. Then we have the fields we want to create, so name, phone, website. You can of course choose which ones you want. So I'm going to create an account with the fields I've chosen before. And finally, this part is for logging problems that we might have. If there are no problems, we return the ID object. We are now going to deploy the code. For that, I will open my guest command and I will push this code on Heroku. Git add point. Here git commit -m. My commits and gits and push Heroku master. The code has been deployed. What I want to do now is make a request. You can see here that I have to make a post. For that, I will need Postman. I will also need my endpoint. For that, I go to Heroku. I open my application. I copy this. I now go on Postman. I put the URL here. And I want the post to be on the /accounts. I now send my requests. Back on Salesforce, I can see that the account has been created. We can see the phone number, my account number 1, and the website. That's it for this video and for this lesson on Heroku. I'll see you soon for another lesson.